For my diversity and media class, today we have a very special guest coming to us on Zoom from Fremont, the Fremont Police Department, someone I had a chance to interact with a lot this summer as part of an effort by the police department in Fremont to get a sense of public opinion about the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the issues after the death of George Floyd. To my great surprise, the police chief was probably one of the most impressive people you might want to ever get to talk to if people could just calm down and do it. Please welcome Kimberly Petersen.
Hi,
welcome,
Bob.
Kimberly. It's good to see you.
Thanks so much. Great to see you. We've missed you. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you very much. I've certainly enjoyed that experience. But today we want to hear more about you. And I want to go back to the very beginning. You're a native of California. Talk about a little bit about your background.
Sure, absolutely. When I talk about my background, even when I'm, doing a police sort of a function, for me, it always really starts with soccer. I was, a high-level soccer player when I was young. I just loved that sport. I did it every single day and opened a lot of doors for me. I was part of the Olympic development team, so I played on the state team, and then I made it to the next level, which is the regional level. And then I also was invited to the national pool for a couple of tryouts. I never made it. I wasn't quite that good, but it's still, I got to travel all over the U.S. and Canada, and I got into Stanford University and a few other very good universities, probably because of the soccer. I'm just going to admit it to you. But so, I got a great education at Stanford. And then we didn't have scholarships when I went to Stanford. There was no scholarships. I was happy to pay because it's great education, but I ran out of money. And so I was only a junior and I didn't have enough money to finish. So I actually took a job playing professional soccer over in Japan. And so I was in Japan for 2 years and had a fantastic experience, really learned a lot of the language, really fell in love with the Japanese culture. And then I also was able to save up money. And when I came back, I was able to finish my schooling. And I graduated with a degree in human biology. And then I promptly turned around and went, no, shoot, now what am I going to do? Now I'm all grown up with a degree. I got to do something. So I looked around, and some friends of mine from soccer, one of them took me on a ride along at Santa Clara Police Department, and I absolutely fell in love. Before that ride along, I had no interest in policing, never thought about it, but I just fell in love with it. It was so amazing for me. It was active. It was different. You could tell it would be different every day. Even if it were the same types of calls, it was going to be different because of the people involved or the specific circumstances. It was serving your community. You weren't behind a desk like turns out I am now, but no desk work, you did everything in the car. So you were out and about. It was active. Mm-hmm. You were expected to be active, and, you were literally helping to save lives in some cases. And so I was hooked. So when I told my parents I was going to be going into police work, you can imagine how proud they were.
Mm-hmm. No, really?
They were. My mom was so mad at me. She was like, if you were going to go into police work, we could have sent you to a cheaper college. But they supported me. And so I started in 1996, long time ago, and was a patrol officer like everybody else. I quickly was interested in all of the physical things. So I became a defensive tactics instructor, baton instructor, self-defense, that sort of stuff. I got into first aid because of biology, that stuff came easily to me. So I did a lot of instructor stuff. I was a field training officer. And then I tried out for the SWAT team because I was too young and naive to know that women didn't try out for the SWAT team. So I tried out for the SWAT team and I made it. And that really jump-started my career because it gives you an incredible amount of training, much higher than the normal amount of training. And I really enjoyed that. It gives you a lot of leadership skills that you might not otherwise get. And, you were looked to be the expert in officer safety. So that really helped my career. I was a detective. I did both burglary detective, I did sexual assault detective, and then I was promoted to sergeant, became a team leader on the SWAT team. So I was on the SWAT team for about 7.5 years, and then I left for a year when we were having a child. And then I came back to start our tactical emergency medical program. So before that, there was no, we call it the TEMS program. We didn't used to have one of those, but I was very interested in the medical piece, and I'd already been on the SWAT team. And we saw that a lot of agencies were starting to put their toe in that water, because in the SWAT environment or the tactical environment, you know, if you're going to bring a lot of heavily armed people to a problem, you need to have medical aids standing by. But ambulances or fire folks, they stay outside of what we call hot zones. So we realized we needed to be bringing those medical professionals into those areas so that we could have that medical support immediately available to either the officer or anybody else, victims, whatever. So I started that program, and we still have a robust TEMS program here today. And then, you know, I promoted through the ranks, and here I am.
And you've been chief since 2018?
Right, for 2 years. I've been chief for 2 years.
But a total of 24 years, I believe.
Yeah,
Fremont?
24 years. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. I started when I was 12. So.
And I was amazed you didn't dream of doing this, and now in the year 2020 you find yourself at the focal point of history, where we have two things to deal with: COVID-19, and then we have the issue with George Floyd triggering a national protest. Let's take one at a time. COVID-19, how did that affect you personally?
Well, I won't say it had a lot of impact on me personally, other than the inconvenience of, you know, having to wear PPE and having, it was a difficult transition to have, we have 3 kids, and a recently adopted child as well. So 4 kids at home homeschooling. So, you know, that was a bit of a transition, but fortunately my wife is a stay-at-home mom. So for us, it didn't have a huge for me, it didn't have a huge impact. For her, it had an enormous impact.
I bet it did, yeah.
Yeah, but you know, we had to make huge changes here at work, because, you know, when it all started, if you remember back to March, none of us knew really what the implications were and how dangerous this really was at the time when the shutdown first happened. And so, but it never, for once, I mean, for 1 minute, we never thought, well, we can't come to work. Police officers are coming to work. You know, yesterday, everything was fine, and this was a virus that was far away. And then today, all of a sudden, it's here and it's dangerous, and, you know, you could lose your life. That it was that quick of a change, right? But we knew we had to be here at work. So we had to make huge changes at work to protect our personnel. I split all of patrol in half. I put all the specialty units into patrol. I split them in half. I basically sent a team home for 2 weeks at a time, so I would have a bench team in case the team that was working got sick, because we just didn't know, you know, how this was going to impact us. But now, where we are today, we look back and we go, okay, we did a good job on managing this. We've had less than 5 infections for the whole department. And we haven't had any of that, you know, major spread that some agencies have had, or some fire agencies have had. So
you've been very proactive.
Yeah. And it's uncomfortable, you know, for people. A lot of people don't want to wear the N95 masks, and we've required it. If you're going to, you know, go into someone's house or have to make an arrest or something, you have to have that full PPE on. Doesn't matter if it's uncomfortable. We've had to require that. And we have to keep talking about how, for us, it's not a political issue. This is, you know, this is science. This is protecting yourself. And by protecting yourself, you're protecting others. And so we really have to repeat that message quite a bit. Because for some people, it is political.
Now, as we're taping this, it's just been a few days since we watched unfold in Washington, the president get ill with COVID-19, go to the hospital, come back to the White House, do his thing. I was thinking about you in this interview when I watched that, and I was going to ask you, what does that present to a police force or the Secret Service or people around him when someone like the president, very well protected, very well known to be well protected, has a virus that can be contagious? What do police officers think when they have to be there if he comes into town or comes near you?
Well, you know, as I watched all of this unfold, without getting into the politics of any of it, what I would say is that from a leadership perspective, that's a failure, because when you're in leadership, you are the person most responsible for following the rules. And, so when I think about, being a leader of an organization, I am the most responsible for wearing that mask when I'm in a shared space, because that's the rule around here. You got to wear masks in a shared space. And I cannot be involved in activities that are outside of the health order. And so really when you bring up that topic, for me, that's a leadership issue. I think that, truly if the police officers or the Secret Service agents were with them, what we have learned through our experience is that if you are wearing the proper PPE, even when you're closely exposed to people with the virus, you won't get it. Just like most of the doctors and nurses who are having to treat people with the virus. If you do the proper PPE, you are, your vulnerability goes way down. Could it happen? Yes, but it's unlikely. So, the people who are protecting the president, they are committed to that. They understand what kind of dangers it has. This has added a whole different wrinkle to it. But, I'm confident that even those folks who, frankly, he's endangering, they understand those dangers and they accept those dangers. And they would have, if I were their boss, I would tell them, you have a responsibility to be fully protected with your PPE. So that's kind of my perspective on it.
And as you look down the road, we don't see this coming to an end very quickly. The university on our end has already told us we're staying online for at least another year, maybe longer. What are you thinking about as the head of the police department in Fremont for the future?
As far as COVID
Yeah, as far as COVID, yeah.
Well, for us, we have really gotten into a rhythm here, like I said, we've been very strict about wearing the mask, that's your responsibility, not just to yourself, but your responsibility to your family and your responsibility, most of all, to your teammates. So, I don't see us making changes until these vaccines are widely available. And it's working. Like I said, we've had less than 5 in however many months it's been, 7 months at this point. So it's working well for us. We're following the health order to the T. Like we do allow some outdoor working out. That's allowed by the health order. When our health order is going to open up the indoor gym, we will open it up, but we'll be very strict about the guidelines. They'll have to wear masks in there. They have to clean the equipment with alcohol, etc. So we're just being sticklers for the rules, and that's how it's going to continue. We did recently have an employee challenge the mask rule and said, hey, I think it's unconstitutional. And we had to sit down with them and say, here's the rule, the internal rule. This is an order. This is the health order. This is the actual lawful order. You'll have to follow it. And if you don't want to follow it, then you can't be a member of our organization.
Has this been one of the most challenging aspects? Because you rose through the ranks of the police department there. You've been there 24 years. You made it to the top. Everyone felt that you deserved the position. But who knew COVID was going to come along and just change the world? I'm asking about management now. How do you like being the manager, the top person?
This is a great job. I mean, it is a great position because this is a great organization. And to me, it is an incredibly honorable field. I mean, the people who work in this organization, regardless of whether they're an officer or a dispatcher or, an animal services officer, they're committed to public service, and they understand that. And then our officers in particular, these are the folks who are literally willing to risk their lives for, in service to others. So to me, it's a very honorable profession, and I love this job. I have, had an opportunity to lead an incredible organization. But yeah, this has been a challenging year.
Yeah.
There's been a time where we're joking, what's the earthquake of the week? Because every week we've got something.
It feels like it. It really does. And unlike most of us, where we do our work from home, you have to leave home. You have to go out into the community. Right. And some of the things you hear, I remember this summer when we were working on the task force, the people in your community were very forthcoming. And I was really impressed how you were willing to listen and to answer their questions about policy and procedure. But I also noticed that they were curious about you as human beings, the type of people you have hired. What do they stand for? And I think they're doing that because the news media is showing us all of the bad officers around the country and digging into their personal stories and how sinister and weird they are. Does that trouble you that we only hear half the story about the police department?
Of course. I mean, it has been an incredibly trying time for all of law enforcement because, you know, these actions, unfortunately, they do sometimes happen. And, you know, sometimes there are just bad people in policing, just like there are, you know, bad people who, you know, work in medicine or bad people who work, you know, in education. There are bad apples. I think those are, you know, few and far between in any group because, you know, for the most part, people in general want to do the right thing. Where it's challenging in policing is that they really are making difficult decisions based on rapidly changing circumstances under a lot of stress. And oftentimes they're making decisions when they're under fear for their own safety. And so sometimes it's not a bad apple issue. Some of these things you see, it's reacting the wrong way. It's making a wrong decision out of fear. And unfortunately, even those things, all of those things, when they happen, they reflect on all of us. And so that is hard. It was very hard. First of all, with George Floyd, I mean, there's no place for that in policing. All of America rose up in anger for that. And that was completely justified. That, you know, we share that anger. In fact, today is the day that Derek Chauvin was just bailed out, I believe.
In Minneapolis, right.
Yeah, so we're preparing for, you know, more civil unrest because of that. But, you know, that is the worst of the worst, right? Some of these happen because officers are human beings and they're making difficult decisions under stress, under fear, and sometimes they screw up, you know, and it's not because they're bad-hearted human beings. It's because it's hard. It's really, really hard. You know, if you're stopping someone for, I'll just say, burglary of a house, you're going to be, as an officer, you know, under stress. You're going to have your adrenaline going. And now if they lead you on a pursuit and then they crash and then you get out and you're trying to take them into custody, if they're not cooperating with you, you're under a lot of stress. And now if one of them comes out with, let me find it here, it's in my back pocket, like this, with a cell phone, sometimes the officer mistakes that for a weapon. And there are sometimes, so some of these, you know, awful events come because we're human beings too. So that's difficult. You know, we have to remember that there's 18,000 police departments in this country. There's hundreds of thousands of officers, and we have hundreds of thousands of contacts every single day. And the vast, vast majority go really well. But sometimes we make errors.
And it's that complicated situation that you must face, and many of us don't understand it, and certainly most of us have not chosen to do what you do. So people are grateful that there are good police officers who are doing the job the way they should, but when that mistake is made, how do you tell a colleague you worked for 24 years, what were you thinking? Why did you do that? Can you say that directly to the person?
Yeah, well, yeah, we have to. I mean, we have a responsibility to do that. We have to debrief. I mean, we debrief routinely calls, even just, you know, small calls, so that we can get better. And, you know, we have to create a culture where where everybody understands that even if the outcome went well, the outcome was fine. If you had this same set of circumstances tomorrow, how would you do it better? How would you do it differently? So you really have to create a culture like that. And that's an important part of accountability within law enforcement, that we have to hold people accountable for those mistakes. Now, fortunately, the most of the time when officers make mistakes, and I'm not talking about the ultimate error where somebody is killed who shouldn't have been killed, who didn't deserve that wasn't acting in a way that, justified that sort of level of force. I'm just talking about your everyday stuff. Most of those mistakes are mistakes of the mind and not mistakes of the heart. But when it is a mistake of the heart, that's when you have to hold the really, really hard line. And those are the people that you have to move out of policing.
And on the other end of the spectrum, and looking at the public, one of the things I learned from your group interactions with your community in Fremont, there were a number of people who kept bringing up the notion, we understand police officers get these calls. There's a suspicious looking black man in the street here. I think you should come arrest him or come look at this or do something about it. And that speaks to that systematic racism that we're all talking about. How do you see that when people make a call like that and they don't have any other reason other than they don't like the color of the person?
Yeah, well, and so first of all, it's the dispatchers who take in these calls, right? And so they translate whatever the caller is saying into a written form and then send the officer on their way. So I can remember as a young officer sometimes questioning, why am I being sent to this call? But fortunately, you know, one of the good changes in this moment is that we're now really taking a look at these things and saying, look, if there's not some sort of behavior that indicates potential criminal activity or really raises the concern level, maybe for that person's safety or other people's safety, we're not even going to go to that call. And we're calling those callers back and saying, tell me more about why are you wanting us to come? Let me give you an example. Just the other day, we had a call where a caller called dispatch and said, yeah, there's these two guys in my coffee shop and they're passing a wallet back and forth and it just looks suspicious. And she tried to ask more, but he didn't have a whole lot more. She asked for a description. They're two black males. And so the call goes out and they're sending 2 units on a suspicious circumstance, 2 black males sitting in a coffee shop, passing a wallet back and forth. So the sergeant, you know, keyed up on that and he called the person back and said, explain again what's, and, you know, really got dug into that and then said, no, we're not coming to that call. We don't hear anything in your description that leads us to believe that it might be a crime. Now, to that person who was calling, they really thought it was suspicious. And, you know, I'm not in that person's mind. I didn't talk to that person, so I don't really, you know their whole perception of it. But that's, you know, incumbent upon us to try and weed those things out. So
take the initiative. Take the initiative and just do it.
Right. And I'll tell you, you know, some members of the public aren't very happy about that. When we call them and say, what is this person doing? They say, he just doesn't belong in our neighborhood. Well, but what's he doing? Well, he's sitting in his car. Okay. It's a public street, you know, tell me more. Well, he parked there and he's been there for 20 minutes. We're not going to come to that call anymore. You know, regardless of what that person's description is, we need to understand what is this person doing that is doing, what is their behavior that is leading you to believe it's suspicious. It's not against the law to park in your car or, you know, park and sit there.
And people do it all over the country and usually don't have to worry about the police.
Right.
Then you go to the other end of it and you have the most recent issue for us at this time in October, where in Texas, a police officer tried to stop someone, tased an individual, African-American male. When he kept complaining that I didn't do anything wrong, I was trying to calm down a situation, he starts to walk away, he gets shot and killed. Now that's, to me, a bad actor. To the viewer, that's a bad actor. When you work in that police force, what should be the conversation about what just happened?
They really need to sit down and watch the video and have a good understanding of what happened and what went wrong. What were the other options? You know, and I only just read about this morning, so I don't pretend to have a whole lot of knowledge about that particular case that you're talking about. But we have to be willing to Monday morning quarterback these events. And that is something culturally that's hard for us, to Monday morning quarterback other agencies' events. We have to sit down and say, okay, we recognize that you don't know everything that went into that case. You can't. You only know what you're picking up on, you know, social media or TV or whatever. But what would you do? What are your other options? What else could you have done to slow it down? What else could you do to create time, distance, or cover? Why are we pushing forward on this? So, you know, you have to be willing to step in and do that Monday morning quarterbacking, which is uncomfortable.
And when a police officer, I think this is something that only you could answer for us. When a police officer is in a situation where he or she faces a grand jury and or charges, what does that do to that individual, but more importantly, to your entire force?
Well, I mean, we haven't had that here in Fremont, so I don't have any firsthand knowledge, but I mean, I can only imagine how devastating that would be. For the officer personally, I mean, they would be, presumably they couldn't be an officer anymore. They would be facing charges. They'd have to hire an attorney, et cetera. It would be devastating, but I'm sure it would be equally as devastating for the entire department. Now, it still does depend on what were the true circumstances of the event, right? I mean, there are some that are so egregious that the department is going to say that was terrible. That has no place in policing. We don't accept that. And that might have a different psychological impact, less of a psychological impact, right? If somebody really screws up and is completely over the line and gets charged, I imagine the rest of the agency would be able to recover fairly easily. But some of these are hard. Some of them are close calls. Some of them from a police officer perspective, you go, oh, wow. I could see why the officer thought that the person who was pulling out the cell phone at him in an aggressive manner might have thought it was a gun. It depends on the circumstances. And in those cases that would be hard for the agency because it's demoralizing for cops to feel like they're putting themselves in danger for total strangers, but could be vulnerable themselves. But that's something we have to accept, that there is risk in this job. And again, I think it's an incredibly noble profession. We have to understand that we have a job to go out there and protect the public. We do the best we can. We train to the highest levels and we make the best decisions we can under difficult circumstances. But we can't control everything.
I could talk to you all day and I know you're very busy, so I'm going to move the conversation along by just simply saying, it seems amazing that there's so many cases of incidents with police at a time after George Floyd. The public is probably thinking, why don't police officers be good and not get into any trouble so these stories will fade away? And yet we see more and more and more. Is there any explanation for that?
Well, it's police officers' job to go and intervene and help the public. And that does mean there will be confrontations. There will be physical confrontations. There will be, matters where you have to essentially fight somebody to take them into custody. And that means there will sometimes be mistakes. It also, I also have to say that some of like I mentioned before, some of these ones that I see, I can understand why, a person mistook the cell phone for a gun or shot because they thought they were in danger. So there are, from a police officer's perspective, they're not all mistakes of the heart. Some of these are just difficult circumstances. Mm-hmm. It's night, you're fighting. Imagine me rolling around in a dark alley with a large person. And if that person, punched me a few times and got the better of me, I may feel like my life was actually in danger. And I might, in that moment, have to make a decision of what level of force I'm going to have to use to get this person off me. Well, that means I could use my weapon. I may end up using my weapon. And guess what? What if that person was unarmed? Then the narrative could be police officer shoots unarmed person. But, this does happen. It's a dangerous job and police are putting their lives on the line as well. So, honestly, I think police do an amazing job considering how hard this job is and how often we are confronted with circumstances that are rapidly changing, that are uncertain. You can't predict people's actions. And people, we work a lot on de-escalation, but what people don't understand is that de-escalation is a two-way street. The person on the other side of that has to be willing to de-escalate.
Yes.
Just last week, if you don't mind a short story,
sure,
we had somebody who was clearly having some sort of psychotic episode. He was fighting with his boyfriend on the balcony. A neighbor called and said, I think two men are fighting and they look like they're stabbing each other. So we get there and out comes the victim covered in blood. He's been stabbed by the boyfriend who's now up on the balcony. And so we confront him from below the balcony. Well, this guy is kill me, kill me, kill me. I want to die. We're trying to negotiate. We're trying to de-escalate. He jumps off the balcony, gets up and rushes at the officers. We used our less lethal 40 millimeter, kind of like, we call them flexible batons, but they're what you've heard about in the news, rubber bullets, essentially. Right. Mm-hmm. We hit him with one of those. It knocks him down. He gets back up. He rushes us again. And he has the scissors he took the scissors apart. He had dropped the knife when he jumped, but he still had scissors, full-size scissors. But he'd taken them in half and had them looped around his fingers, like Edward Scissorhands. And he's rushing at the officers, yelling, "Kill me, kill me, kill me." So they hit him with the rubber bullet once. It knocks him over. He gets up. He rushes them again. They hit him now with 2 other rubber bullets. That knocks him over. He gets up. He starts to rush him again. I mean, what do you do? You know?
Right.
Well, fortunately, they were able to tase him, and it worked to lock him up long enough that they were able to jump on him. But, you know, if that hadn't worked, if they had missed with that taser, tasers don't, there is no panacea to make people comply, you know? They actually have to be willing to comply at some point. And he wasn't able to, we were able to jump him before he was able to fight through that taser. But, you know, we might have had to shoot that man. And, you know, it would have been terrible. Would have been terrible for one, to lose a life, for that man's family, but it would have been terrible for the officers as well. They didn't want to shoot him. Fortunately, they were able to, you know, wrestle him into custody. But that was an incredibly dangerous situation. You know, it was this close to having to shoot him.
And most of us can't imagine being in a situation like that. So we're glad that the officer was safe and the individuals turned out to be taken into custody safely.
Yep.
Correct.
Yep.
One of the issues that was brought up this summer was you have a homeless population issue that has to be addressed, and getting
Right.
some sort of specialized care professional to work
Right.
with the police officers. I remember
Right.
them saying 3 o'clock in the morning is when we need them, but there's only police officers on duty. Are they going to
Right.
be working on that?
Well, so we have a mobile evaluation team. We have now 2 officers and a sergeant, paired with 1 clinician and 1 crisis intervention specialist. So we are lucky enough to have that sort of capacity, but they're not 24/7. And, you know, we've heard, of course, a lot over this summer about people calling for the defunding of police and that police shouldn't have involvement with mental health issues or homelessness. The problem is there is nobody else to call. We agree. We would love to have, you know, specialized units to handle all of those calls, because they're a significant portion of our calls, especially calls involving any of our homeless population who, you know, often it's just low level, like this person is asleep on my patio. Can you come ask them to move along? And we just ask them to move along and they will. So, you know, a low level call like that, probably, you know, some homeless outreach personnel could handle that. The problem is we don't have that. You know, we really need the counties to change their system so that they have these immediate outreach specialists. Right now, the way the counties are set up, they do have services, but you've got to be willing to go in there, you know, and a lot of these folks just aren't prepared to do that. They're not in a mental state to do that. So we do it because there is no one else to call. There's no psychologist to go out to a call at 3 a.m. or on Christmas. You know, we're it. So we would love more help. Here in Fremont, luckily, we do have that capacity Monday through Friday, but we don't have it 24/7. And honestly, even if we had that capacity at 3 a.m,
Mm-hmm.
there's nowhere to take them. We don't have the beds. There would be nobody to hand them off to. So if we had a crisis intervention specialist at 3 a.m. for a homeless person who is having a mental health crisis, if you don't take them to the hospital, there is nowhere else to go. What would you do with them?
Right.
So
society has to address the bigger issue as well
we have
as
the
the
structural issues we got to deal with, you know?
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
I've kept you almost too long. I got to ask you one more question. It has to
Sure.
do with my diversity class. We talk about our cultural identities. And as you
Yes.
know, I'm a gay man. I have a husband and I take care of a sister with Down syndrome. You publicly talked about being openly gay, but you don't like it to be the number one thing that comes
No,
out of
nobody
people's
wants
mouth.
that to be the number 1 headline, right?
Exactly. But tell me why you feel that way.
Well, I mean, I think everybody wants to be, you know, recognized for what they do, not you know, not who they love. But yeah, I am openly gay. It's never been an issue for me. I'm comfortable with it. Have a partner of many, many years. We have 4 kids. I have a hard time saying 4 because we have 3, but we recently adopted another young man. So we have 4.
Yes.
Thank you. And this has been an interesting time because my daughter is 22, and yeah, and she, you know, so she has been really challenging us with with the difficult conversations because, you know, she very much falls into the category of wanting the defunding, et cetera. But
Really? She
yeah,
actually
but here
tells you
her
that.
mom works for the police. Yeah, so we've had some challenging conversations there. And then my boys are mixed. Both of our biological sons are mixed. They're Mexican and Black. And then our adopted son is Black. So, you know, we've had some really good conversations in the past 6 months, challenging conversations, but good conversations that need to be had. So it's had its silver linings.
And I'm sure along the way, you've had numerous conversations about, Mommy, are you safe? Is this really what you need to do? How do you respond to them?
Yeah. Well, the truth is, Bob, I'll share it with you, that I used to actually be a cop, but now I'm a chief, right? So my biggest danger is a paper cut. So they know that I'm safe. Yeah.
Well, that's good
Yeah,
that you're safe now.
Yeah, when you're a chief, they don't want to let you out of the building. So
I can imagine.
yeah, but no, when I was younger and when I was on SWAT and on the street and all of that, yeah, it was scary for my daughter. She didn't really, she dealt with it by not dealing with it. You know, she didn't want any part of it. Whereas my sons have always been very interested in it and wanted to go on ride-alongs and that sort of stuff. But my wife is an ex-police officer as well. She's a retired police officer. She worked for LAPD. So, you know, that's all they've known is being in a police family.
And I'll give you a compliment based on the visual only. Here's where television people can actually do good. I watched you and your officers work very beautifully together this summer with your community to talk about racism, Black Lives Matter. And I noticed the command structure was strong and you interacted very well and you command a great deal of respect.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, Bob.
You can see it. And I think most people should tell the police sometimes when we don't see it, because we can anticipate challenges with that force, but you don't seem to have those.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you see that from your side of the screen there.
I do. Remember, journalists, we see everything, but we don't get to talk about everything. I thank you for this time. I hope you do get a chance to come talk to the class and keep talking to your community, because that's one thing that right now is a wonderful thing to do.
Yeah, it's not a one-time thing, right? It has to go on. It has to continue. We're doing a similar event this weekend called the Faith and Blue Weekend. So we're doing some outreach with some of our local churches. That'll be good. More of these conversations. And it's been good for me. You know, it's been really good for me to hear the firsthand experiences from our folks from communities of color, because it's almost a universal experience from Black men that at some point in their lives, you know, they feel that they've been racially profiled. And that's hard to hear. But, you know, it's important to hear it. And it's important to understand that that's their experience. And especially when you're a mom raising, you know, 3 Black kids. So it's important to know. It's important to understand.
Well, bravo and good luck with the gray hair. It's coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. We look forward to welcoming you.
Okay, we'll see you next time.
Thank you. You stay safe and all the best to your family.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.